Okay, so we have people joining.
Yes, a couple.
Nick is there. Just to do a mic check here, Nick, can you hear us?
The phone is green.
Yeah.
And neither is Alpha.
Caller one is green.
Just going with the sign sheet.
Wonder if
And it's not mine.
Oh, like Nick just.
Can anyone on the phone hear us?
Yes.
That was the time.
That was Nick, yeah.
And can you see the screen?
Yep.
Okay. So welcome everyone, third work group meeting of the California Trash Monitoring Work Group. We wanted to just thank Michael Baker International for hosting us today. It's a great spot, and we've got screens all over the room, which is really nice.
For those of you online, you're really missing out.
There's even snacks.
We have snacks, so for those of you in the room, you can help yourself. It's courtesy of Michael Baker International, coffee and snacks. There's water over here, and then the swimming pool, if you can just be careful dipping in and out of the swimming pool. And the DJ will be playing music during our intermission. So remember to tip your waiter, and so it's a pretty swanky spot here, so enjoy.
Yes, and I just wanted to mention that I have pressed the record button on the GoToMeeting, so if all goes well, we'll be able to review it afterwards and share it with anyone who wasn't able to attend today. And just know you're being recorded. Let me see if I can. So just a kind of a brief overview of what we have planned for this afternoon. We'll go do introductions before we jump into things, and then Tony and I wanted to give an update from the council meeting, which was last Thursday. We're going to get to this, but since I'm talking a lot, this is Christine Cornelli from Larry Walker Associates, co-chair with Tony Hale from SFEI. Then we want to finally approve the charter. We've kind of done a couple of iterations of it, and we'd like to get that sealed today. And then we'll have some time for the three existing subcommittees to give some updates before the highlight of the day, our guest speaker, Shelly Moore. And then we'll just kind of wrap it up and plan to be out of here by 4 o'clock. So I've already introduced myself, but to get things going, I'll say it again. I'm Christine from Larry Walker Associates.
Shelly Moore, Squirt.
Michael Ackle from Michael Baker.
Jenna Tay, also from Michael Baker. Allison Gerkbrock, also from Michael Baker.
Evelyn Lundell, Recap.
Kirk Van Ryn, Office of Water Programs.
Laura Starkey with Environmental.
Grant Sharp, Orange County Public Works.
Tony Hale, San Francisco Estuary Institute.
Mark Williams, AECOM, San Diego.
Justin Klein with Michael Baker International.
Great. Oh, yeah. And those of you on the line?
Nick Martirano with the Water Quality Monitoring Council.
Ryan Jensen, County of San Diego.
Dave Renfrew.
Andy Gray, UC
Environmental.
Riverside.
Oh, I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
This is Vivi Stevens with the City of Carlsbad.
Can we go back one? We couldn't make out the name for the male voice.
And this is Andy Gray at UC Riverside.
And Dave Renfrew with Alta Environmental.
And Francesca De Leon from Wood Environmental.
Jarma, did you introduce yourself?
Yes, I did. Sorry.
Can you go one more time?
Yes, Dharma Bennett from the State Water Board.
Caitlin Kalua with California Coastkeeper Alliance.
Holly Wire with the Ocean Protection Council.
Anyone else on the line? And for those on the line, can you hear us and can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, a couple of yeses, good sign. So now that we've all been introduced, Tony and I would like to give an update from last week's Water Quality Monitoring Council meeting. It doesn't like my first click. And one of the things that we wanted to go over for anyone who's new or as a refresher, kind of the work group goals and objectives for our trash work group. And this is something that Tony and I presented last week. We had about 15 minutes to give an overview of what our work group has been up to and sort of our needs and wants. So we wanted to just briefly walk through kind of some of the things that we told the council last week.
We might want to just call out that Grant is a council member, and so he was there in official capacity as a Water Quality Monitoring Council member, and then Nick is the director of the Water Quality Monitoring Council. We have people who can contradict us if we misstate things today, so please feel free to step in and make any corrections or certainly embellish anything that we're offering.
Great, thanks, Tony. So kind of the first item on the list is that we're really looking for coordination between organizations on trash-related matters. That's kind of just like quick couple-word sentence on one of our goals. But we also want to support programs that are monitoring for trash and provide public data. So kind of get the communication between public data and those collecting data. Get the data to anyone who needs it and wants it. Our work group would like to promote the implementation and continue refinement of standardized trash monitoring methods so that all the data being collected or lots of the data being collected is comparable. We want to be sure to communicate trash monitoring assessment information to agency staff and decision makers at the federal, state, and local level. We want to be compiling information on existing trash monitoring programs and activities and any that are developed in the future and make these available to everyone through a trash monitoring website. We want to develop, recommend, and provide guidance for implementation of approaches for data sharing. So kind of sharing all the information on how to share the information. And then finally, we want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the purposes of the California Water Quality Monitoring Council, and our mission statement sort of works toward keeping that in mind.
So it was an opportunity for us to present information and updates with respect to the work that we've been up to here in the trash monitoring work group. We also, along the way, learned of things that are happening within the context of the broader Water Quality Monitoring Council. And we wanted to share with you some things that we learned. But before we move forward, just to say that another feature of our presentation was to break down the different work groups, because this was really like a coming out party, if you will, for this work group, a first opportunity to speak to the Water Quality Monitoring Council as a whole, having just been initiated back in April of this year. So it hasn't been very long. And so we thought it best to introduce them to these overall goals that you heard Christine enumerate there, but then also how we're going about it through the lens of the 3 specific subcommittees that we created, we collectively created. We're not going to go over what we identified as the goals, the barriers, and next steps for each of those subcommittees, only because we're going to be providing updates, or you all are going to be providing updates later in the meeting, and we didn't want to be redundant to you. So if you do have questions about what was shared in more detail about those subcommittees, we're happy to address those questions. But but maybe the best thing is to focus on what the reports out will be during the later part of this meeting. But in the meantime, what we wanted to share with you is kind of things we learned, and this is where Nick and Grant can also weigh in, but the council is still developing its strategic plan and associated direction after DWR left the partnership that kind of made up the council some months back. And so having a new MOU in operation to take the place of the old one, they're still kind of figuring things out about how the council will proceed. So this was very much kind of a two-way street where they want to solicit information from the different work groups, including the trash monitoring work group, trying to focus on how to be of use and empower the work groups to get their work done. They are going to, the next meeting is slated for mid-January, where they've invited work group leads to help inform the next steps in formulation of their strategic plan. We also learned that the work groups are in various stages of development. So you have work groups that have been around since the invention of dirt, and then you have work groups that are still just now forming. So on one end of the spectrum, you have the wetland monitoring work group that's been around since before the creation of the Water Quality Monitoring Council, and then you have Evelyn's team, Evelyn here representing the drinking water work group, really kind of just getting your legs underneath you and working out exactly how to advance the goals of your work group. So, various different things, and we realized, I think, along the way that there's probably a lot of information we can share among the different work groups. But it was interesting to see just that there are all these different pathways that people are taking. So another takeaway is that as we were hearing from the collection of different work groups, the active work groups, I should say, there were times when it was clear that there's quite a bit of overlap thematically, right? Where the Healthy Watersheds work group might share a lot in common with the Wetlands Monitoring work group, and they would probably need to coordinate very carefully about how they approach their respective problems and solving those problems. Ours, I think, is usefully distinct, is the way I would put it, is focusing on trash is not something that necessarily, it's clearly water quality related, of course, but it's not covered by other work groups. So it's nice to know that we have our niche clearly defined. Collaboration network, what do you want to say?
Oh, I just put that up because there was the presentation on the collaboration network, which is another one of the work groups talking about what kind of needs we want for being able to post videos on the council's website, or having meetings recorded, or sharing videos about anything about trash monitoring. But they are there and looking to help however we want them to help, and always looking for topics to kind of be featured as the YouTube video of the month.
Right.
So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, good to kind of bear that in mind, that there are ways that the work group can kind of amplify each other and work across those different things.
Oh, I did that one too.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Tony gave me bullets, and I had the power of the keyboard, so I added some things. I just wanted to bring up where do we stand relative to other states, because the council was asking this question of many of the work groups during the presentations, and I thought it was good for us to just sort of think about, take one step back and say, where do we stand on trash monitoring relative to what other states are doing right now, and is there anything we can glean from what other states are doing, or we want to be reaching out to them in any way?
With the goal, I think, to be able to say that we are world class, right? That was always the thing that came up. Steve Weisberg was kind of putting that out there. Are we operating at a high level? Do we consider ourselves world class, either by virtue of our own innovation or by adopting kind of a model that is the best we can find? So where do we stand relative to other states? But if we're talking world class, then we might also be going beyond our borders beyond the federal borders to looking at different trash monitoring efforts out there. And yeah, we could probably set aside a whole thing to talk about this topic in particular. And that might be something to consider for the next meeting, because I think we do have some useful cross-pollination with interstate trash monitoring efforts, ranging from, let's say, the US EPA's Escape Trash Assessment Protocol or NOAA's marine debris, coastal monitoring protocols. So there's a number of different things that are either crossing multiple state boundaries that we could think about how best to fold them into our discussions. And then there are these other regional trash monitoring efforts that would be good for us to kind of find a way to not only just come to understand, but kind of assess efficacy for addressing the kinds of management questions that we would want to address. And when, as part of this, we were supposed to articulate our most important need at this stage. And we mentioned that we are new, and so we haven't even necessarily had the time to spell out what our needs would be. But among the things that Christine and I thought about were how, as we are building our, getting our legs underneath us and thinking about our needs, we want to make sure that we have the right people around the table. So we suggested that the Water Quality Monitoring Council could ensure that we are able to kind of summon the brightest minds in trash monitoring to the table and help us to vet these different ideas. And it's great to see so many of you around this table now. One thing that also came out of the meeting was to learn that the National Water Quality Monitoring Council, so not California, but the National Water Quality Monitoring Council seems to be in trouble from a federal support standpoint. This kind of came as a shock. It's probably a shock to you, Grant, right? Nick shared the news that that after a period of some doubt as to funding, it seems to be that, and I've since put out a number of feelers and gotten confirmed that the Water Quality Monitoring Council at the federal level is I would say in doubt. It wouldn't surprise me if it got kind of picked up again and re-energized at some point in the near future, but the idea that there wouldn't necessarily be an annual conference, and I don't know how many of you have attended that, but it's usually a conference with a lot of energy behind it, and then also the associated National Water Quality Monitoring Portal, which, as you may know, is kind of tightly bound to WQX and is a downstream repository of a lot of data that comes from multiple different state repositories. Jarma, who's on the line, she worked on a project to get a lot of seeding data into WQX, and the National Water Quality Monitoring Portal, while it's not synonymous with WQX, it kind of lends accessibility to what would otherwise be this kind of very difficult to access database. So, the idea that these things could be defunct or decommissioned is pretty
shocking.
I don't know if, Nick, you want to add anything more than what I've shared?
No, I mean, well, I'll add a little bit. Yeah, that it's basically the founding group, AQUI, which, forgive my ignorance, I don't remember that particular acronym, oversaw several subcommittees, and one of them was the National Water Quality Monitoring Council. And AQUI itself was suspended as a body just due to lack of a FACA or FACA. They're still exploring, like you said, what the future might be. The council co-chairs, which was represented by USGS and the EPA, have reached out to the states and the council members to, express their desire to kind of keep the efforts moving of several work groups that they had in place. And we're having a meeting next week to kind of discuss kind of next steps. The key kind of part about having it suspended, an AQUI suspended, is just the lack of funding provided by the Department of Interior, which was to allow the council members themselves to meet at least once a year, and then allowed for funding to plan the conference, as well as to allow some of us, like myself, to travel to the conference in order to help put it on. But again, it's not necessarily permanent. It's just kind of it's just lapsed in time. It's been over a year, and it just reached a certain timing point where they couldn't justify keeping it together any longer. With the new administration or some different type of budget information, it could change everything kind of in the snap of really quickly. So it's very much fluid, and this was an announcement that just came out on December 5th. So still trying to keep my ear to the ground too and figure out the next steps, but I'll keep everybody informed.
Thank you very much, Nick. And so it sounds to me that this is almost like this passive, like no one took action to save it, so it just kind of lapsed instead of some active dissolution.
Right, that's correct.
Okay. Because there just so we're aware, there are other efforts that are more active in dissolving these types of things, such as the National Advisory Council for Environmental Policy and Technology, or NACEP. That's something that Margaret Macaulay of USEPA and I sat on. That was actively dissolved by virtue of executive order. So that's the case where it was killed actively and said, we're getting rid of this. So that's not synonymous with the Water Quality Monitoring Council, but it's but that one is important maybe to distinguish between this kind of like passive loss and more active one. Any questions or additions to the takeaways from last week's meeting? All right, hearing none, we'll move on. So as we mentioned, we presented goals, barriers, and next steps for each of the different subcommittees. We're just going to kind of cycle through these instead of going over them in any detail, recognizing that we'll be covering this later today with the report. Among the things we also covered were opportunities that we saw for the different subcommittees to work together. So having insight into the different subcommittee meetings that have been happening, I think we'll begin to see patterns where the subcommittees realize that they should work together with other related subcommittees. Examples being, let's say, the community-based science.
Oh, I forgot to fix that one.
It's formerly called citizen science, now called community-based science, for a number of reasons. They're seeking some advice, counsel, or resources from the data management subcommittee. Sometimes it's information, sometimes it's tools. Likewise with the homelessness-focused subcommittee, thinking about working with the data management committee. It's useful, nevertheless, to have these kind of thematically focused subcommittees because they can kind of more carefully formulate their focus and the kinds of needs they have. So this is not to suggest that we should just kind of always operate as a united whole. It's good to have these specific foci. And then there's also, I think, some talk about the homeless focus group also working together with the community-based group to work on different methods for monitoring trash in the encampment. So there's been these talks, and I'll be really interested to hear what the workgroup leads have to say about those potential integrations and how best to carry them out. Some of the barriers that we see shared in common among the different groups are the idea of data not being comparable, whether geographically, whether focusing on different management questions, but really wanting some way to bring data together across monitoring questions and monitoring methods. And also, we've noticed talking about kind of the multiple perspectives even within each individual subcommittee about different varied objectives, measurements, policies, and stakeholders that drive, let's say, just information gathering within the context of homelessness. So there are sometimes barriers in just how to handle some of the perspectives that are brought to bear. Some of the next steps that we talked about at last week's meeting were to showcase the tools and data sharing strategies, which we think can address some of the requests made of the data management committee, and then also exchanging information regarding the monitoring program objectives and practitioners between the homelessness and community-based science groups.
I think that wraps up our update from the council meeting that was on December 5th. Does anyone have any other thoughts or questions on that before we move on to our next item? Okay. So back earlier this year when we first formed this work group, Shelly and I worked on a charter for the group and have shared it a couple of different times with everyone. We've gotten some great feedback, editorial, and sort of adding some detail in places that were a little too wishy-washy. And we would like to sort of finalize the charter, at least finalized for now. Though there was one comment that was left that I thought was worth this group discussing today, or seeing if we can get any additional feedback. So I've excerpted the part of the mission here and highlighted the piece that there was sort of a question on. So the question is, do we want to include more language in the mission that's indicating something is going to be produced? We talk about how we will be discussing and coordinating, and we'll, support this technical exchange. But do we want to say anything about what that will produce? So I wanted to see what some thoughts were on that. And this is most of the language with some pieces cut out that don't really need to be in it and would make the slide look a little crazy. So if there's anything we want to edit on the text I have on the screen, or just thoughts we would like to throw around, we welcome them at this time.
One way to keep it fluid is to maybe have an annual work plan or biannual, and that way you can say what you're going to produce for that time period, rather than being held producing it for charter. Yeah, within the charter.
Eric.
Did I read in here, you have your mission, but it doesn't really say much beyond, having the meetings and discussing things to support how you're going to meet your mission. So if you could just provide some of those loose specifics, you've met the criteria, somebody who comes in cold will understand what you guys are trying to do rather than just have meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might be along those lines. I wonder, kind of taking Shelly, what you said, is there an opportunity to mine what is being developed by the subcommittees and kind of roll it up into the charter without being too short-sighted? And we don't want to complete things and have to rewrite the charter every year.
You shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be too specific, but just a general term, what you guys are going to be doing. Mm-hmm. It's easier for some of the other work groups because they have a water quality portal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're not operating in that manner yet.
Not yet, yeah.
Yeah. So, the wetlands work group didn't have a portal. They're still doing things to support wetlands monitoring. Mm-hmm. And if you could do borrow water on this one. It's basically crap. So, you're looking to identify through, monitoring guidance that's out there and stuff like that. So it's not just a discussion.
Right.
I don't know what all your subcommittees are doing.
I think the monitoring guidance is a real important feature of that. And you spoke earlier about standardization, and that's really what's going to drive the program, is that as long as everyone is gathering the same type of data in the same fashion, under the same methods, under the same protocols, so that everything is comparable across the board, and then you can make informed decisions based on comparable data, and that's really critical to the program.
What the modern council is trying to do is we can get that efficiency and standardization to capture that in here.
I think we do mention standards and you know, to promote better informed decisions, but I have to go look at that language.
Do you want me to pull it up or not
It's
right
not
now?
within the mission, the first paragraph, but maybe somewhere else.
All right, yeah, I had just put the first paragraph up here since there was a question about the discussion, coordination, and technical exchange. But the charter itself is out in 3 or 4 pages right now. So we can certainly look at the level of detail that's in there.
Yeah. I worry about kind of opening up a session where we're going to be spending, you know, an hour wordsmithing things. It's great to have this feedback. I'm wondering if we might, to be most efficient, kind of spin off a smaller group that just works on refining the charter and gets it to a level where we can promote buy-in. If so, if that's advisable, then would people be interested in fine-tuning the charter to get it up to a level where we think people would be ready to sign on the dotted line, so to speak, vote on the dotted line?
I have a signed page for leads to sign.
Then what?
I have an approval, maybe on my chart.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's legal, you can do that.
Sure.
And it doesn't have to be revised if you leave.
Right. Would anyone, so just to kind of raise your hand if you're interested in this kind of work on the charter. We don't anticipate it being very arduous, but I think we can. Okay, great. So you're Mark, right?
Right.
Okay.
I would imagine that your the council sponsor, who is Shelly Walther, would be interested in helping.
I'm just waving her arms in the air right now.
Hi, Nick.
Oh, is she there? Sorry, hearing it.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry.
No, sure, throw me on. My comments was, I think it's a little lengthy, that it could be maybe a little bit more efficiently produced. And then looking at other of the monitoring council's charters, if we want to have some kind of standardization of what's included.
That document was created from looking at the other charters, so yeah.
Great.
But there are some inconsistencies amongst all
and
the
that's
charters.
fine.
Yeah.
They're very different. I have a spreadsheet of that.
Are the other charters 4 pages or longer?
Some of them are about that, some maybe a little longer.
Some are short.
Like 17 pages.
So just 13 more pages. Top hit. I mean, that's what we're aiming to do.
Well, one of the things that people really gravitated like ours element was if you're interested in what we're doing and you're trying to get grants, if you can support our work, towards our mission, we'd be willing to write letters of recommendation.
Okay.
Stuff like that. And that's why 18 pages. We put a lot of effort to try to really grow the interest in our organization. And when you start talking about, you help us, we'll help you with a letter, that some people I like that. I want to be there.
And are you referring to the Collaboration Network or?
No, Safe to Swim.
Safe to Swim, okay.
Yeah. The other one, we don't have a charter. It's just me.
Okay. So I think your idea about the biennial work plan is good. I think we might end up doing both things, revising the charter and then also
The charter general to work product, and then get more specific in how we're going to fulfill what we've promised in the charter.
Yeah.
Specifically. That's work plan.
So Mark, Shelly, anyone else feel, basically what I'm asking is if you're going to be one to say, like, I don't like the charter, then I want you to volunteer to say you'll work on it, because it's no good to object at the 11th hour.
I love the charter.
Yeah. Shelly, she's the Thomas Jefferson of the charter. When in the course of human events, we need to monitor trash. Okay, so great. So we'll go from there. And Eric, do you want to join the team?
I wish I could at a time.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
The draft charter lives on for another day.
One more cycle, and then let's approve it next time.
Yes. You're on the right path.
Okay, so next up is something I'm excited to hear, which is the subcommittee reports. We've allowed, I think, like a half an hour for each subcommittee to give an update, or like 20-minute update, 10-minute Q&A type discussion. And by virtue of how I have them listed, we can go in this order, or we can draw names out of a hat if Caitlin doesn't want to go first.
Actually, I would love to go first. I just unfortunately can't stay the whole duration of the call, so I'd also like to offer maybe taking, the 20 to 30 minutes now, and as people have questions, happy to engage in the Q&A as we go.
Yeah, that's good. So going first is good, in other words, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Sure. So I'm reporting out on behalf of Shelly and I and the larger subcommittee. We had another call, I believe it was our third call, last day of October. And since then, we've really honed in our goals for the subcommittee to be very data focused. I'm looking at my notes actually from our last call, so unfortunately I need to pull up another email to read out our goals. But I'm going to kind of circle back. So I'm going to talk about our current projects of the program, and then I'll circle back with our formal goals that we landed on following the last trash monitoring working group meeting that we had last quarter, this larger group in Sacramento. Really appreciated the conversation and discussion we had there, both with Greg Gerhardt from State Water Board, and of course a discussion with everyone else in the room to chat about where we were going with this subcommittee, and really being very specific to honing in on the data that we can collect to then, of course, that can maybe inform policy decisions in the future, whether that be at the State Water Board level or the Regional Water Board level, but we're being very careful not to be prescriptive in policy recommendations necessarily, but instead quantifying actual trash generated by homeless, whether that be within an MS4 or outside of an MS4, as well as the different methods of, just methods that are employed by different municipalities throughout the state. So that's our goals in kind of a nutshell, what we've done since the last working group meeting. We're now moving forward to develop a survey that will be distributed out to various municipalities. We're hoping for an early 2020 release of the survey with the holidays, everything. We're still on our end developing the survey questions. We had very robust discussion regarding the types of questions we're seeking. Things like the generic information of what's the annual aggregate data, if it's being collected by municipalities, if they have annual reports. Everything we're collecting will be publicly available data. And we're hoping to have a first round survey that will be very concise, essentially finding out if municipalities even have data to share, and even quantifying those that don't, and having a point of contact and having a second round interview survey that can be much more detailed. And our next steps are to actually develop that survey, vet it within our subcommittee, and then we're hoping to work with State Water Board staff and others to determine the best method for distributing the survey, seeing it may be best coming from the State Water Board itself. So that's where we are right now. I hope that's clear. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take a step back and go into more detail on anything.
Caitlin, thank you very much for that. And I think others might have some questions. Just to lead things off, I wonder, I had an opportunity to look over some of your notes from past meetings, and there was at least some discussions about some of the challenges you face with doing data collection when you are at least indirectly dealing with human subjects. Do you see that as a continued barrier towards your data collection? Is that something substantial, or have you found some kind of guidelines to help you navigate that territory?
Oh, thank you, Tony. Actually, yeah. So Wynn has, I know, excuse me, Wynn, if I misspeak here, I believe you're chair of the data management subcommittee, and you're involved with each of those subcommittees. So you're just this wonderful conduit and wealth of knowledge. When working alongside Sarah from San Diego River Parks Foundation, pulled together a guidelines document, taking a step back of just coming down to data privacy and the fact that we are seeking information from others. The first step being that we are seeking publicly available information, but there are others that may have more that they're willing to provide with us. We have data privacy guidelines that kind of discuss to what extent, what type of detail. I can pull up that document. It's a Word document I'm happy to share with this larger group as well. That goes through those privacy guidelines. One thing that was a big piece of conversation within the subcommittee that would be very careful when it comes to collecting data is when it comes down to sharing data about active encampments, for example. That's very sensitive information that, whether it be an NGO or municipality, it's not information that necessarily should be publicly available. So I know it comes down to the timing. I think a lot of what we're looking at is data that may be over a year old, and therefore it's less sensitive in that way. That's definitely a topic of continuing conversation.
Thanks, Caitlin. I wonder, in connection with that, because a lot of times encampments will form, be shifted, and then return. So do you also have to think about, in addition to timing, do you also have to think about geospatial resolution? That is not to say exactly where, even if it's a year later, maybe a year, my point is that a year following, they might re-encamp in the same area. So it might look like a violation of privacy.
Right. So I'm taking a step back into my own notes here. Because we are still developing the survey, I mean, it's up to us if we end up not necessarily collecting that spatial data other than whether it's right along a riverbed, right along the stream bed, or if it's more inland, maybe having more general kind of data collection in that way. So we'll certainly have some parameters that we're looking to kind of make this an easy data input from our surveyees, because we do want to make it easy, but we also don't necessarily need to collect more information than is necessarily needed in that way. So I think that's still something we're considering as we develop that survey.
That's great.
I can add to, this is Sarah from the River Park Foundation, that as part of this committee, I've been asked to kind of ask, as far as we can tell, nobody is aware of a lot of existing case law for those kind of privacy concerns related to homeless encampments and the trash associated with them. We're not aware that has come up in a lawsuit or something like that yet. I'd be interested to hear if it has. It hasn't in San Diego.
Because it's not about PII. It's not about personally identified information.
Right, exactly. And so one of the things that we're looking at, that I've been asked to look into, because we work really actively with a couple of different homeless outreach providers who have a lot more, they have access to a lot of the personal information, is if they know of any industry standards in terms of what items are just general practice, not open to the public. If locations are okay, but anything that identifies the person staying in the location is not okay, or if there's any sort of standards for that. So I have a couple of outreach out to the organizations that are active in San Diego. Some of those are statewide organizations that might be able to speak a little bit more broadly, but that might help give us a baseline.
Eric, you have some experience dealing with either community-based science around homeless encampments or dealing with different programs. Do you know if there have been similar guidelines set up about what types of information is acceptable, either legally justifiable to collect, or it should be carefully regarded?
In practice, they're trying to get just data and help the people as much as possible. And so generally they have a card or a packet of products that they can use, but the card is so that they can get resources to help them right here and then, because they can't provide that. They want to be in a situation where they're not being pushed away because they're not there to help, just treat people like, a data source. And so it's humanizing the science. That's at an NGO level. When you start looking at some of the data being pursued by federal agencies and universities, it's a human subject, and there's guidelines that have been established for that. Just talking to the person, they have to go through criteria to make sure that how they interact and the questions are cleared, and it's not a person that you're getting data from, but if you are, whatever the vital statistics are you've gone through, you're fine. The standards are very, very different. There's a thing that I didn't hear, I'll just throw it out. When folks do the cleanups, they go out and they say, we're going to be in this area, we're going to be removing material, you're not going to be able to live here, police or whomever is going to be going to the area asking you to leave. We're giving you a heads up so you can take your belongings. Whatever is left here will be treated as trash and free. So they can remove anything that is personal. I haven't heard any objections to that, and this has been in practice, I think, for over 25 years. That's how we were doing it 25 years ago. That's why I say that.
There is a lot of case law about the notifying people living in encampments and the time that's between the initial posting and when trash can be removed from the management standpoint. And it varies jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
I'm sure.
I know San Diego has different rules, and Caltrans has different rules in DFW. So it's even just by landowner, it can be different.
Orange County, DFW, Fish and Game now, right? Fish and Wildlife. But it was on county property that was co-managed. So you were doing, and then actually the sheriff came in, facilitated. Generally, they were gone when we did the cleanups.
Yeah.
It gets worse down in your area. I've been on the border, and there's all kinds of personal information. I've found bus tickets, IDs, and all kinds of stuff that gets dropped. And there hasn't been any, guidelines saying you can't pick that up, you can't collect it. I don't know what people are doing with the information that's printed on it. The bus tickets, there's information on it. A Frito-Lay's wrapper has information on it. So just that's somebody else's issue. They have to come up with in this my community science programs.
Quick word for those of you on the line, if you're not actively seeking to enter the meeting, if you could mute yourself, we can sometimes hear laughter and typing in the background. So just go ahead and mute yourself unless you're talking. With that, if anyone has questions of Caitlin, either in the room or online.
Hi,
go ahead.
I'd say, hi, this is Laura Meeker with County of Ventura. I joined the call a little bit late, so I missed introductions, but I was just thinking in the discussion about sensitivity of information collected in homeless encampments. It sounds like there's kind of two different, to me, I'm hearing it's like there's two different types of data that might be collected. There's information about just the trash itself that's left behind, which we have some precedents for, as Eric was saying, in terms of cleanups that have already happened or that are ongoing that we continue to do. But then there's also the individual, the personal aspect of it, the people. If now we're trying to connect the number of homeless individuals with the quantity of trash or how it's generated, now getting more information than that's human subjects. And it just made me think that I work also as a task force member on our Prop 1 Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program in our IRWM region, and we are undergoing training with some of our NGOs that are going to be doing some outreach in our disadvantaged or underrepresented communities, and they have to undergo training as of, I think it's a state, maybe it's even federal, but requirements for training of using individuals or as personal subjects. And it's a training that's offered free. There's free training through CSU University. We're working with CSU, San Bernardino Water Resource Institute as one of our consultants on that. But they offer the training, the university does, that's free for anybody using human subjects. And it seems like that might be a guideline to look to as another resource in forming a survey or what kind of information you plan to collect. Just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, Lauren, thank you very much for volunteering that information and drawing the distinction between, kind of the directly directly studying human subjects versus the trash itself. I think there's a kind of in-between stage where there's also the perception that you are surveying the people, when really that's not your goal. You are looking at the trash. So there's maybe, it's something, so Shelly Moore, who's in the room here, and I, when we're doing our surveys, we, as part of a project, we've been trying to kind of steer clear of encampments, not only because, it's pretty challenging to deal with that load of trash, but also because we don't want any perception that we are surveilling people. And so having clarity on how to manage even just the perception of human subject monitoring is something that could be helpful.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma.
Yeah. Grant, you wanted to add?
Caitlin, this is Grant. I was curious if you had a chance to get any of the policies associated with like the point in time counts that happen. I believe those happen every 2 years.
January.
Yeah, every January. But I think I know Orange County did theirs last January, so January of 2019, and that was interesting. I happened to volunteer just to be part of it. I wanted to see what it was all about. We used a ESRI Survey 123 form and went out and actually interviewed individuals just using the form and just collecting information on our phones. And I just some of the it was uncomfortable, interviewing some of the subjects. I felt uncomfortable. We didn't collect any personal data about them in terms of we didn't collect name. I believe we did collect age, but no names, anything like. But there were some very personal questions. And then the other comment I wanted to make is having just come from Eric's workgroup meeting, the Safe to Swim Network. This is one area where there might be, and Nick brought this up during the Safe to Swim Network meeting. This homeless encampment subcommittee might be an area where there could be some cross-pollination with the Safe to Swim Network groups, because as we learned at Eric's meeting, with the investigative order issued to the San Diego River watershed parties down in San Diego County, SQUIRP, Shelly's organization, is facilitating the development of that work plan. The work plan, I believe, went in today for review, and one of the things they're going to be quantifying and measuring is the amount of fecal contamination or human fecal loading from homeless encampments. So they're going to be looking at that in the San Diego River watershed. So Nick brought it up during that meeting that it might be something where those two work groups might want to just kind of get together and maybe there's some potential for collaboration.
Yeah, thanks, Grant.
Yes.
I was going to bring that up as well.
That.
At least at a minimum to collaborate on efforts. Because if you got a TMDL for bacteria in place and you're looking at source identification, you identify homelessness, that's going to be something that's going to have some sort of resources and management practices involved, and could be a way to collaborate on efforts to eliminate two sources of water quality impairments, one being trash, the other being bacteria. Also, we talked about this. We had an entire kind of topic session at there's a November 15th trash management questions workshop that was held at SFEI, and homelessness was one topic area. And we really got into these kind of this in-depth discussion on, how the breadth of people you have to coordinate with, whether that be law enforcement. One that rings true to this conversation would be the Department of Social Services in the area, where you bring in this kind of collaborative group of people when you go out there, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're doing a cleanup event, that's one thing, but if you're looking to actually try to solve the issue of homelessness and trying to find out personal information, you'd be better served to bring out the entity that's responsible for that kind of work, whether that be local, county social services people, where they can collect that information and provide resources to people, whether that be law enforcement to help provide safety, versus just providing cleanup and maybe providing trash pickup services and things like that. So there's a lot to be learned from the San Diego River Park Foundation, who is really adept at kind of bringing those groups together and trying to solve trash and clean up the river, but also try to solve the homelessness issue as a whole, which requires, what came loud and clear was it requires massive coordination across many entities.
Yeah. Part of that whole dialogue too is trust. And so when you bring in partners, you need to bring in people that will have the homeless trust. Bringing in a police officer, that's a safety thing. You're not going to get a trust issue out of that. So a lot of the NGOs, they're bringing in that trust, so that you can do the work that you need to do, whether it's getting trash data, water quality data, or other type of information from that community. And that's what the San Diego River Park Foundation does. That's what the water keepers do. A lot of organizations is finding out who in their community is trusted and growing the collaboration so that you can get everything done appropriately.
I'm just wondering if there's been any coordination with LA Homeless Task Force people. I mean, there's a lot of people working on it. I just wonder if there's been some conversations with them to learn how they're handling some of these issues.
I'm aware of a lot of the case law that's been going on in LA, but I don't believe there's anybody in LA that's on our subcommittee. Is that right, Caitlin? I don't think there's anybody in LA.
No, that's correct. And we're hoping through the survey, we will have an opportunity to connect more directly with different municipalities throughout the state. That's also where I want to plug for others currently in the working group meeting now, as well as others, if there's others you think would be wonderful to include in this. Please connect with both me and Dahlia. Our emails are provided on the slide right there. If you'd like to be part of more of these deeper dive conversations as we develop the survey. It is something we anticipate having out at the end of January, early February. And it is a first step. I mean, it is a first step to connect with different municipalities, learning who is doing what, essentially, and who's partnering with who, and knowing that some information is gathered by point in time. Others is a more continual, ongoing collection of data by partnering with local water quality and NGO groups. So there's so many different approaches, that are taking place. And so that is the first step, especially in the survey, is simply gathering that data and honestly making those connections too as we reach out with the survey.
I think if you know anybody also in LA who we could even, if it doesn't have time to be on a committee, but would be willing to be interviewed by somebody like that, we'd be happy to do that. We're trying to, what knowledge is already out there? And I mean, I think it's an important clarification that we're not really suggesting, I don't think, that we want to collect a lot of personal information from most of these encampments. It's more just a matter of what kind of data might be either inadvertently collected while we're out there, like such as through, if we're taking photographic data or something like that, might we accidentally collect something that we don't really want to have in our data set. And then beyond that, if we are geolocating encampments, is there a degree to which that might put those encampments at risk for some sort of like ugly thing that we don't want to be part of? And how do we make sure that we're not contributing to any of that? So it's not necessarily that we need to be collecting people's birth dates and names. Like, we don't really want that data, but how might we, make sure that we're being respectful of all those different.
When your partner's fine.
Sure.
If it's appropriate for them, that's fine. But you want to be clear in your relationship, what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think the point in time count's a great example. There's a lot of data that exists in those point in time counts that publicly is only census tract specific, but there exists a lot more detailed data, but it's sort of like all or nothing as far as I can understand it from the San Diego Regional Task Force, that if they give you all the data, then all of a sudden you have social security numbers, and we don't want to have to go through that kind of process. But we'd love to have geolocations and counts, and like how many of those are in natural resource areas or in a water channel or something like that versus like on a city street. So there's a lot of nuance. How do we get the data we want from partners who have it without getting ourselves into stuff that's way beyond the scope of.
Right now, there's a lot of training going on statewide at city and county levels.
And so, Caitlin, is it time for those people who are interested and invested in what results you might get from your survey to kind of weigh in and review questions that you formulated? I guess what's the right timing for people to partner with you on at least reviewing what you've put together?
I'd say join at least our listserv for the subcommittee, and it would be our next subcommittee call. We're hoping to have at least that draft survey proposal, a full proposal to the subcommittee to be vetted, and then actually kind of tested within the subcommittee and then actually shared.
Okay.
Caitlin? Can she hear me okay?
Yeah.
This is Eric with the Clean Water team. I've done a lot of stuff with Megan. Has she been able to help you out?
Hey, Caitlin, did you hear Eric's question?
No, can you repeat that, please?
So Eric said that he's done a lot of work with Megan. This is Eric Burth from the Clean Water team. He's done a lot of work with Megan. Are you familiar with that work?
Of the Inland Empire?
Yeah, Inland Empire, absolutely. Yeah, we work very closely with both Megan down Inland Empire Waterkeeper. I know their program with the Clean Camp Coalition has been very successful with Santa Ana River, and I know they're now partnering with the City of Ventura. Actually going to be connecting with her later this week to kind of get the latest update on their efforts there, as well as the Russian River Keeper is another one that started their program 2015 to kind of not just only with a camp cleanup, I mean, it's actually engaging with homeless in a way that maybe rather than evicting or trying to remove camp, it's as simple as knowing where the encampments are and providing trash services as a first step. May not be perfect, but it has had resounding success in their community. So definitely keeping my ears to the ground and trying to gather as many lessons learned as possible.
Yeah. And Caitlin, this is Laura again with County Ventura, and I'll send you and Dahlia an email just to make sure you have my contact information. But just as you just mentioned that, yes, City of Ventura has now been kind of implementing potentially or is interested in looking into a clean camp type of coalition model, as well as I think the Nature Conservancy in our county. We put on I helped organize a workshop. I guess it was about this time last year or earlier early 2019 on homelessness in our watersheds. I work with both our stormwater program, countywide stormwater program, and I'm a coordinator for one of our watersheds in our integrated regional water management program. So kind of crossing both of those two programs, we've had a group where we've gotten together all of our homeless service providers, like you spoke of, together with our watershed, more, I guess, for lack of a better term, service providers, environmental groups, our NGOs and property managers, as well as our county flood control, TMDL parties, permittees, and really kind of talked about some of these issues. Of course, it wasn't from a data collection point of view, but I'm very aware of the different parties in our county that are working on homelessness issues and plugged in pretty well with our CEO's office, and can give you the contact information for one of the people that is working with our Continuum of Care program, Tara Caruth, who has access to a lot of the data that we collect in the point in time counts, as well as knows a lot of the activities that are going on in our area, of who is kind of maybe also collecting information when it comes to our homeless encampments and where they are. We have actually kind of a map that I don't have access to, but others do, that mostly I think are probably I know like our sheriffs and our Continuum of Care program use, and I don't know if they're willing to share what kind of data from it, but they might be able to share some non-sensitive information directly from that. So I'll send you an email with my contact information. And
Lauren, do you not have access to those data because?
I'm sorry, you cut out, or I missed the end of your sentence.
Yeah, so Lauren, I was asking if you, I'm just thinking of different policies, and do you not have access to those data about where the homeless encampments are because that's regarded as sensitive by your county?
I'm assuming that is definitely part of it, but I would say first off, I don't have access to it because I'm not actively part of the Continuum of Care program. I'm in our Watershed Protection District, which clearly we know of the homeless encampment issues on our property and some of our partners' properties and conservancies that, you know, we work with, but it's really more of our Continuum of Care, our service providers, along with our you know, safety officers that are the ones that are really tracking, I would say, and are sharing it, because they're sharing it among themselves. Like they have a reason and a need to be able to share, just like you're saying, you know, whether it's our backpack medicine program that goes into an area, but then they want to share that with our another service provider that they that they have made contact with this group and that there's this number of individuals living in this area. So they have a network of how they communicate with each other and share that information. And it's specific to our Continuum of Care program, which is a multi-agency and organization kind of coalition, all focused on providing more like the traditional homeless services.
Okay. Another question I have, really this is for Caitlin. You know, in thinking about who you have on your subcommittee, who are the active members, who are the passive members, and then where you see the kind of greatest gaps as far as having representation on your committee, where you would want to ensure that people are weighing in on the critical questions about how to move forward. Did we lose connection?
No, I'm there.
Okay, you're still there. So I just wonder, are there any gaps geographically or in terms of the type of representation that you would like to have on your subcommittee that you think should be filled?
That's a great question. I'd say right now we have great input both from I think NGO, and that Sarah and I, we come from different geographic. I'm based in Sacramento, but I do represent organizations throughout the state. Sarah has deep expertise in San Diego. We have a good number of municipalities that are more Northern California based in Sacramento region, as well as Fremont and others in the Bay Area. So I think that is a gap, is having more Southern California, whether it be Ventura, LA, others, weigh in on the subcommittee. And as we collect data, especially as we develop a survey, having that level of buy-in is, I mean, wonderful, and that level of participation and collaboration, I think, would be excellent. I think right now so that's a gap, is Southern California municipalities, but we really need, I think, a state water board rep of some sort, whether, again, that be Greg or others in the Division of Water Quality, to be part of the conversation, but then to also to be that liaison, whether it be on behalf of the state water boards or it's issued on behalf of the regional water boards, the survey, to actually kind of have more of that connection between the water boards and the municipalities, so it's not simply coming from an unknown entity necessarily.
Mm-hmm. That brings up a good point. This is Nick at the State Water Board and with the director of the council. I'm struggling to find out any information on beyond the subcommittee leads, which you have up on the slide. Anywhere like on the web page or anything about how to join the subcommittee, when the subcommittees meet, what they're working on. So I think that's maybe an issue because if someone like myself can't join or doesn't know when the meeting, it's going to be hard for me to kind of maybe identify and spread the information to people that would fulfill those kind of gaps. So I think that'd be one thing that would be helpful for myself and maybe for the website and the charter as well.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was just experiencing the same thing, Laura. I'm looking for how to sign up for some of the subcommittee or email notifications.
Yeah, that's great. That's something that we can remedy. All right. Any other questions for the Homeless Encampment Subcommittee? All right. Sounds good. So shall we move to the Community-Based Science Subcommittee? Aaron,
yeah,
are you with us?
This is Aaron Hammond, one of the co-chairs of the Citizen Science Committee. I joined late, so I missed the introductions. But yeah, thanks for letting me address the group and give you an update on what we've been up to. So we've met in September, October, and November, and December. And the Community Science Subcommittee, one of the first things we did was actually discuss our name. Originally, we were the Citizen Science Subcommittee. And after some feedback from a number of people who are involved in citizen science / community science, we found that there was a pretty broadly experienced impact of the word citizen, especially in U.S. organizations. This doesn't, to the best of our knowledge, carry over to any international organizations, but in the U.S., and I think possibly in particular in California, the term citizen is interpreted as U.S. citizen, as opposed to, citizen of the world, like that. And so drives down participation in some groups, some demographic groups. So the Citizen Science Subcommittee has been discussing changing our name to the Community Science Subcommittee. We're going to talk about it a little bit more before taking it to the full group, but I think that's kind of how it's heading. So that's the first step. Other than that, we are continuing our efforts to reach out and connect with as many community science groups as possible. So we're going to be we've already sent around a spreadsheet to some people to try to fill out as much information of different organizations working in California as possible, and we're going to keep on spreading that spreadsheet or collecting information to add to that spreadsheet as much as we can. So by all means, if anyone would like to know what kind of information we're looking for, or what groups we've already contacted, or has ideas of groups that maybe we have not contacted, by all means, get a hold of me or my co-chair, Shelly, and we'll get in touch and help add to this database. It was originally started by Win, so Win, you're going to get on the plug here, at UC Riverside. And so we're basically just trying to fill that database in as much as possible. In terms of coordination between subcommittees, we've been working with the data subcommittee a fair bit to kind of try to flesh out and talk about what a good platform, preferably digital platform, would be needed for citizen scientists to effectively go out and collect useful data. So this is everything from a protocol for how to establish a survey site and how to actually conduct a survey, to establishing guidelines for the types of data to collect, and maybe different tiers of data, sort of different levels of complexity of data, depending on the involvement and skills of the citizens involved, the community members involved, so that if there's a great deal of skill and passion and energy there and time there, community members can go out and collect really high-level, high-quality data that is useful for answering questions. But if there is less time, maybe less passion, less energy, less skill available in a particular community's efforts or outreach or abilities, that they could still go out and collect maybe more basic data, but that data is still useful for answering management questions. And so developing that hierarchy has been great. We're going to be continuing to work with the data subcommittee more. Yeah, and I think and more on that as it develops. I'm pretty excited about it, and hopeful that the data group maybe already even has or can develop some platforms that are really user-friendly and that we can distribute to community science organizations and have them collecting standardized data with a relatively minimum of confusion.
Thank you, Aaron. This is Tony, and just to pick up on that one point, your final point there, kind of now representing the data management subcommittee, we did talk about having a showcase for the different tools, and one of the things we did mention earlier when we were focusing on integration among the subcommittees was that we want to work with you, Aaron, to schedule a time when we can bring the right people around the table to review some of the tools that we can share with you. So that's still kind of on the to-do list, but it'd be good to kind of put something on the calendar and invite the right people as you define them to be there to dive into the tools and ask questions. Gary Conley of Second Nature is going to showcase his thing, and then we've also developed some tools. One of them would be the Survey 123 based tool, and so we can kind of go from there. So we will kind of take your cue, but we're, I think, game to do that.
Yes, absolutely. That sounds fantastic.
I would imagine that people might have questions of the community-based science group. So Eric has a question, but before I turn over the reins, I just have a quick question about how you see, Aaron, and your team see the opportunity to work and develop tools that might be useful for homeless encampments. Kind of where is the crossover there to empower NGOs or other community-based scientists to be effective in how they are gathering data from homeless encampments? Do you see a connection there, or are you drawing a line to say that you're not overlapping?
Well, I mean, my hope would be that, especially working with the data management group, that the protocols that we develop are flexible enough that if you go into a homeless encampment or near a homeless encampment, you'd be able to do something similar, set up a survey area and collect information on whatever trash is there from wherever that trash is generated. homeless encampment or not. And then certainly, whatever protocol we developed, some information on the surrounding sort of conditions would be a part of that. And so if you're saying, if your survey is set up right next to a homeless encampment, that'd be a good thing to notice. And that would allow you to address different questions than if you were miles from the nearest homeless encampment or something like that. Beyond that, I'm not quite sure. I honestly don't know that much about the trash generated by homeless encampments and how, sort of what level is surveyed. I mean, do people go into homeless encampments and actually look at the trash within an active encampment, or do you wait until the people leave and then look at sort of just the refuse that's left behind?
Well, it depends, yeah.
Yeah, we have people saying, yeah, both, and it depends on different things you're aiming for.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like especially once all the human beings leave, then you could treat the area just like any survey area and count or measure the trash within that area.
Yeah, often the challenge in those cases, I know I'm kind of speaking for a lot of people here perhaps, but it's the idea that the trash loads are so great that you can't necessarily do individual tallies the way that you might if the trash loads were a little bit more, lending themselves to individual speciation of trash. I think that exact question lends itself to that sort of trash or question taxonomy, that level of detail taxonomy. That if maybe it is not just a matter of the skill or passion or drive from the community science members, maybe it's a matter of the task at hand. And if it's so overwhelming, maybe you do take a more superficial, there's just a lot of trash, and you score it a 10 or something like that. If you could develop some kind of different scoring criteria, that would be robust, statistically robust, but not require individual piece by piece counting.
Yeah, can I jump in on that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Earlier you mentioned high quality. I want to just chime in. We don't talk about high quality data. We talk about the granularity, and that's what you're talking about right now. Big, massive trash or fine scale trash. When we talk about high quality data, it should be QA. We're talking about quality assurance. It's data of known quality. So asking people to go out there and collect low quality data or high quality data, that's not part of the discussion ever when we do citizen science.
I mean, perhaps we're talking about different definitions, but I've been involved in community science. I've been involved in community science for a very long time, and the quality of the data that we collect is always a part of the conversation.
Yeah, I don't think you follow. Yeah. You were describing high quality data being rigorous. Getting fine detail rather than gross. They can both be high quality.
No, I'm sorry if I was unclear on that one. By high quality, I mean just statistically reliable, verifiable data. It can be at any scale, any granular scale.
Good, thank you. The question I wanted to get before is, you talked about a spreadsheet, trying to get information, so you spread it around. I don't understand what that tool is about or that exercise.
Yeah. So this is just a way of trying to increase communication between community science groups, so that if somebody has a question, a pressing question in their community maybe, they want to know what kind of trash is around or where that trash is coming from maybe, or has their community seen a benefit from the plastic bag ban, for example? Like is there, or, I guess that wouldn't work now, but if there was a law being proposed and they wanted some before data, and so they can compare it to after data once the law was passed, that we would all have this sort of contact list of community science groups, so that if any of us had a question, we could reach out to the other people on that list and say, hey, does anybody know how to answer this question? Does anybody know how to do this? Does anybody have any suggestions for this problem that I'm facing?
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Are you familiar with there are two listservs? One is national for water quality monitoring, and there's a lot of practitioners that you could benefit from interacting with. Right now, it's kind of a little bit in limbo because that was under the National Water Quality Monitoring Council. But then there's also the Clean Water Team listserv that I administer.
Cool. No,
online.
No, I'm not familiar with that list. So if you wouldn't mind sending me a link, that'd be fantastic.
All right, we'll do.
And Eric, just so we know, are those listservs, are the postings to those archived so that people won't ask questions that have already been answered like a month earlier if they just joined?
Okay, that's the third one. No, that's the one on the Citizen Science Association. And so that it's free form, and they don't get deletions, and it's not archived.
Okay. You know what I'm talking about,
yeah. The rest of them is just emails, just email lists.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a live dialogue. We've tried those over the past 10 years. Failed. It just failed. So if you can get one launched, that'd be great. I just haven't seen those work. Yeah, but the other dialogues, they seem to be functioning okay.
Yeah. Okay. Evelyn.
I'm sorry, I'm just new to this, so I was just having some questions about, is there any coordination with, Plastic Pollution Coalition or the Clean Seas Coalition, and that's one of my questions, because my second question is there, I'm glad you brought up the bag ban. Obviously, plastic bags are a huge issue, and we've sort of dealt with some legislation that's dealt with it. Is there any data to enforce how effective legislation can be? Because the legislation is always generated with data, right? So there's like a chicken before the egg kind of thing. So this could be a really great opportunity to provide reinforcement to show legislation being effective, as it goes forward and as it grows. So those are sort of two questions. I don't know if they've been addressed already.
Shelly, do you want to?
Sorry, I'm afraid I kind of lost both those questions. Could you?
It might be too broad. I'm just essentially, is there any science projects that you know of that maybe support legislation, say for instance the bag ban, to help kind of formulate and shape data from regional data about how effective it is or how not effective it is?
So we do have a project that does speak to specifically the bag ban,
right?
And that will be part of my talk.
Oh, great. I look forward to that.
And then your other question was about coordination,
yeah,
with other groups.
Plastic Pollution Coalition, they're pretty big, and I know that LA Waterkeeper has done some trash monitoring programs.
So Sherry Lippy out of NOAA, she coordinates a lot of these different programs. I wonder, Erin, if you could speak to whether there's been any kind of discussion about the different people that should be around this particular subcommittee, and if you kind of, I guess I'm repeating the same question I had for the homeless encampment team, but do you feel like you have adequate representation on your subcommittee?
Yeah, so as far as the coordination goes, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're trying to put this sort of directory together, is to make sure we do, as we hear about more and more groups out there, we can sort of collect that information. Sherry has definitely contributed quite a few names to that list. And Wynn, of course, has done a tremendous job filling it out, putting a lot of data together, a lot of contact information together. And then that is hopefully going to continue to grow, constantly. And like I said to somebody earlier, if anyone has groups that they think we should be adding to this list, by all means, reach out to me or Sherry, and let us know, and we'll build this thing out as large as we can. In terms of representation on the committee, I mean, it's a pretty nice active committee. I think there's pretty good representation. One question that would be great to have someone with the expertise to answer would be, exactly what kind of data is needed to answer like bigger municipality level management questions. What is useful, maybe even to a legislator, a statewide legislator, something higher? What kinds of stuff are they looking for? What kind of things make an impact to them that would be possible to be generated from a community science group? That's something that, since none of the members of the committee have any really direct experience with that level of data impact or use. And so getting some perspective there would be great if anybody has any suggestions.
Yeah, Sheila Kuehl with the County of LA, her office could be helpful. She's been very
sorry, who is that?
trash issues. Sheila Kuehl, LA County Supervisor.
Ah,
She's
cool.
been very embedded in trash issues for probably decades, if not. She could be a good resource for some guidance for that.
Excellent.
It sounds to me like, in general, I've heard mention of a lot of really key groups in LA and different areas that we could use some more outreach, just to let people know what we're doing, we exist, and get that expertise into our work group.
I would suggest going through the water board's outreach coordinators. Each of the regions has one, and they're tasked with working with communities as well as environmental justice. The last meeting, which was canceled, the environmental justice group, they were going to actually go to some encampments and stuff in San Diego and learn from people down there regionally what's going on. So that would be a group I would send emails to and get a conference call going, invite them to help you answer those basic questions.
Sounds good.
Coordinate with them and also make a list of key groups that just our committee, our work group knows of that maybe.
Yeah, so it sounds like that's underway. They have that list that they're working on. And then Nick, if you're still on the line, maybe you can help to facilitate the discussion with the outreach coordinator. And we can and for our side, we can furnish more information to daylight what the subcommittees are doing, their mission, their goals, and current membership, so that you can reliably recruit the additional people. And I know that Nick is juggling a number of things, so maybe he did or did not hear me.
Gita retired, so I don't know
Who retired?
Gita.
Oh.
So she was.
What was the question?
Nick, who took Gita's place in the interim?
No one yet. She's still technically in the office.
Oh, okay. Well, Nick, and Tony, Tony has something for you.
Nick, what I was wondering is if we provide more information about what the subcommittees are doing, their near-term goals, as well as membership via web page where people can follow this information, that can we lean on you to reach out to coordinate with the water board's outreach coordinators. Sorry, that sounds terrible. Coordinate with the coordinators. Communicate with the coordinators to help ensure that we have adequate representation on some of our subcommittees, and most notably to have some Southern California Bite representation on our homelessness and I know we do have some, but additional representation on homelessness and community-based science.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if we can have something for me to point to by filling out these web pages that we have on the My Water Quality, I can send them to all sorts of different people, and we can advertise them via the council members themselves, but also I can reach out to the swamp coordinators, as well as our Office of Public Participation and tribal coordinators, all sorts of different avenues. I just have to have something really to show.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So the leads that we have on the line, just bear in mind that Christine and I will be reaching out to you to solicit some structured information that can help us to complete those pages. All right. Any other questions for Aaron? Aaron, was there anything more you wanted to share?
No, that's about all that I got.
Cool. All right. So we will shift to the Data Standards Management Coordination Subcommittee. We're going to shift to another slide deck here. And you've heard Wynn Cowger's name come up a few times. He unfortunately can't be here today, so I'll be speaking for this subcommittee. We've now met more times than I can recall. So we met at a frequency of every 3 weeks, and then we shifted to every month since June or so. And so, yes, we've been moving along, and we've been kind of articulating our goals and getting some things done. So what we've been up to is the following. Wynn has a grant from NOAA and the National Marine Sanctuaries to produce this trash taxonomy. So what you see there is a link to it says SSEI.li. That's just because I created that link, but it's fully Wynn and UCR's product, and it's a trash taxonomy that is designed to share aliases for the whole panoply of different possibilities when it comes to how to classify trash when you are doing individual tallies of trash. Can we, one more? So it is designed to look at all the different the different ways that you can kind of individually identify items and find synonyms or aliases for the same item. So one group might talk about it as a six-pack ring. Another group might talk about it as a six-pack yolk. So how to, part of the challenge is that people have different definitions for the same thing, or different names for the same thing as commonly defined. And so they've leveraged some of the seed money from NOAA and the National Marine Sanctuaries to build what is designed to be comprehensive. But he would like your views on this. And that's that link there, SSEI.li/trash tax. Say that 10 times fast. Trash tax. All one word. For those of you, you should be able to see it on our slide deck here. And if you could visit that at your earliest convenience, you can comment directly on that online spreadsheet. And so you should have commenting privileges, and hopefully not editing privileges. But you can have commenting privileges to say that you see an issue here. What has yet to be done, just to be really clear, are there any more bullets? It's not focused on tiering, binning, or establishing relationships among those kind of vertically oriented items. Really, it's focused on the aliases or the assembling kind of the all of the semantically similar but differently named items. So that's what he's interested in. And so please review that and provide feedback. We would greatly appreciate it. We've also been working on the data model. So this data model was originally created a year ago, and it's been enhanced over time. Nick mentioned this meeting that we held just on November 15th of this year called The Path, or Plan a Trash Hackathon, that was convened by the Water Board at SSEI. And at this meeting, there were a number of different subject areas. So Shelly here saw the macro, micro, plastic subject matter focus group. And then we also had a data model, homelessness, storytelling, and tobacco. So it was a good opportunity to kind of zero in on these things and identify what are the most pressing management questions attached to each of these respective areas. And so within the data model focus, there was what kind of emerged at the top of priority was looking at utility to the community. And we could go next bullet. So examples being, what would a data sharing community look like? How would it operate, ownership, and have data use stipulations? So partly implicit in that is kind of if you were to either create a data sharing community or some kind of hub of information, how would how would stewardship operate over this community? And another example would be how do we begin to build this community? So what are some qualities that it would have, such as transparency, accessibility, and that how do we make sure that all contributions are heard and acknowledged? So these were kind of the things that Wynn said bubbled to the top of these discussions. And if you would like to see, but that's really just a small piece of the broader number of management questions that were featured. So if you go to trashmonitoring.org/notes-from-the, I'm being very precise, but you can see it there on your screen. So if you go ahead and you can follow that and then see all the notes that Nick and Anna Holder, who's the Sea Grant Fellow with Nick's unit there, who put this, helped to organize and assemble the notes, but they're all there on that page, including data model, but not exclusive to the data model. So if you're interested in homelessness, if you're interested in macroplastics, if you're interested in any of those other topics, please take a look, see if the kinds of management questions that you are interested in made the cut, so to speak, because it's those management questions that will have articulation in the next hackathon, which will take place in February. So another idea that we've been pursuing is the idea of, you might call it radical interoperability, or how to take trash results from trash monitoring methods, whether it's going out and doing qualitative assessment or tally-based assessment or taking overall volumes, and what are the kind of common things that we can use to crosswalk those results to get a bigger picture of trash in the landscape. So, this is when you're faced with trying to answer questions about trash in a given area where, you have citizen science, community-based scientists out there doing their thing. You have people who maybe have been working with homeless encampments, and they're all taking data in some way, shape, or form. So how do you crosswalk those? And so one of the ways that Shelly and I have been talking about doing this in connection with the project we're working on is the trash density module for the data model. So, how could we take things and bring them forth in terms of a density, that is, items per unit of spatial extent. Examples being kind of the counts or tallies or volume or weight or even qualitative assessment as, over a known spatial range. And then how could they be reliably kind of understood as being able to move from one method to another? We think that there's real promise in this, but we would want to know, who do we partner with to see some of the results of these crosswalks? Who can, in other words, vet the validity of some of these results? Because you might say, well, what seems to be the odd thing out there might be even like qualitative assessments, but when you really think about it in the way that they are conceptualized, is that they are in some ways a density measurement, right? That is, if you see trash in the environment, it's not enough to know is there trash or even what's the amount of trash, but it's over what spatial range, right? If you collect 5 cups, is that 5 cups over 5 blocks, or is it 5 cups over 5 square feet? So those measure the range of space matters, and so that's something that we've also been working on. So it'd be good to know if you're interested in vetting some of those early delivered results. And then what you've heard Aaron talking about is needing to have some kind of sense of the tools out there. So we've also been talking about that, and we would like to schedule a time to review those tools. So we've been talking about it with community-based scientists, but if others who are not in that subcommittee would like to be involved and like to see some of the tools that are commonly used, that would be good to know. And so we'll be working with Aaron to get that scheduled. So some other news. So Nick mentioned this morning he found an interesting article, and we agree it's interesting. And so we wanted to take a second to kind of review with you something that's kind of, you might see it as interesting or fun. There's a link here to an article online. It was in Forbes online magazine. So if we could follow that maybe. I guess not. You might need to exit out. So this will be just kind of a little break from the norm. This is focusing on the use of drones and artificial intelligence to detect trash in the environment. This is kind of a follow-up from one of the presentations that we saw in our last trash monitoring meeting, and we think it might be useful or interesting to those of you who are seeking to, certainly seeking to expand the geography of coverage that you might be able to achieve with trash monitoring. And so this kind of is pointing towards the future where that can be done effectively. So if we can scroll down to the video embedded within this article. There we go. Yeah, we can play it and make it full screen. Hopefully the sound comes out.
Research is showing that.
Oh, look at that.
Who's that?
I don't know. It's a good-looking guy.
Trash report.
Oh, it doesn't.
Oh, it's unavailable.
Can
we just click the YouTube link and do it on YouTube? Name YouTube.
We start over.
Yeah.
Nobody listened until we started.
Research is. We are ingesting plastic on a daily basis. By intercepting trash before it makes its way into the bay, we are preventing microplastics from getting ingested by other animals and in turn by people. The San Francisco Estuary Institute, along with our close partner, the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, has been funded by a public agency, the California Ocean Protection Council. Conventional trash assessments require a crew up to 10 practitioners in the field. Practitioners are in the creeks, in the streams, identifying trash, classifying trash, counting it, weighing it. With a drone-based method, you're able to collect thousands of images and then feed that into a machine learning algorithm to detect the trash. Without Kinetica, the machine learning algorithm that would detect trash might take days. But with Kinetica, we are able to run the same detection methods in hours.
When they run that model in Oracle Cloud, they're able to access what we call a GPU, a graphical processing unit. So this allows them to run the model inexpensively and very fast.
Realizing AI's potential will not translate naturally to societal benefit. So we really need stakeholders such as companies, NGOs, governments to come together to shape the way we think about AI deployment and ensure that the outcome is what we want.
We are at the forefront of action, but we have to be backed by the right information. And that's where institutions like SFEI come into place. Having a more systemic way of monitoring trash, that's a remarkable resource that cities, that different organizations can use. We do have the power to make positive change. We know that we can restore wetlands. We know that we can add urban greening features that can filter our water. It can really help our wildlife to thrive, our people to enjoy nature, and bring life back to areas which are otherwise barren. Particularly in the Bay Area, we have so many people who are willing to take action once they have information. But I think once we understand the impact, then we are, as a culture, willing to take bold moves.
All right. So, yeah, that looks like a blatant advertisement for SFEI and our partners, Squirt and the OPC. And to a certain extent it is, but it's also a rallying cry for us to kind of get outside of our usual, little silos and speak to the outside world. Evelyn's a big champion of communication and thinking about what are the appropriate messages to reach people. Trash monitoring is not necessarily glamorous. But this really is an outgrowth of a partnership where we realized that we didn't have the hardware resources to pull off what we were seeking to do in developing this algorithm. We had the knowledge, but not the resources. And so by partnering with Oracle and Kinetica, we were able to get free servers, right? And they said, all we need to do is tell your story. We said, okay, sure. So that was a good trade-off for us, and I think it's been very fruitful. So, you know, what we didn't want is for our limited resources in tuning the model to be the reason why we weren't able to achieve it. Recognizing that once the model is created and it's available, then you don't need such robust, you know, powerful resources to run the model. It's more in the creation of the model that it takes a whole lot of resources. So that's why we partnered with them on this. But it's been an interesting experience, and we've now talked about this not only with this group here, but we've gone to DC and talked with people about this. But you know, I approach the use of these tools like artificial intelligence with a lot of caution, for the reasons that we were talking about earlier with respect to surveillance and concerns about at least being perceived that we are monitoring people. A lot of times people are concerned when they see drones that we are watching them, right? And I think it's a valid concern. So, you know, what you don't see in that video is just that we approach the work we do with an abundance of caution, because the tools are too useful to ignore. But at the same time, we don't want to have an appearance that we are flying over people, that we are flying over encampments. We steer clear of that. And this, you know, if this is operationalized and adopted by different programs around the state, and I think in one way, shape, or form, whether through some of the tools we create or others create, it will be, then I think it would be good to have some guidelines that help to ensure that these tools are not abused and instead used in the way that they are intended to be used. Just to let you know, the culture of artificial intelligence practitioners and developers does not really allow for a lot of philosophy. When we were in DC at this conference, it was remarkable that they were never talking about kind of ethical guidelines for the use of AI. That was almost like foreboding. And in fact, all they talked about was removing barriers to the use of data that would feed the engines of AI. And that was probably the most alarming thing for me, is just how people weren't trying to talk about different rules in the same way, like when you think about robotics. Isaac Asimov, a fiction writer, came up with like the 3 rules or 4 rules of robotics, right? That robot, number 1 is a robot can't kill a human. Number 2, a robot can't do something that will indirectly kill a human. These kinds of rules, which of course it's based in fiction, but wouldn't it be good if we had some people thinking about rules to govern the use of some of these tools? So I just want to let you know that we are trying to think carefully about this, and there are reasons to be cautious. But at the same time, these tools are so powerful and potentially able to complement some of the work that people are doing on the ground. And a lot of times, the reasons why we don't do things when it comes to monitoring trash and gaining more information is that we quite simply don't have the resources. We can't get out as often as we want to. We can't cover the areas we want to. And so this is trying to fill that gap, not replace the work that people are doing, but to complement it and further extend it. So it would be, you know, good for you if you want to share the story, if you wanted to comment on it, if you have criticism about this, it's good for us to use, I think, this forum to talk about this and other tools that are kind of pushing what's possible and trying in good faith to extend what all of you, the good work that all of you are doing. Eric, it looks like you want to weigh in on something?
No, I just think this is awesome. You push the tools out there, and even though there is a reaction of, oh, that's a drone, I don't like it. If that was an airplane, electronic glider, you're not going to have that fear factor.
Yeah.
But if you're afraid to share the information being this is a resource tool, people may not know that, oh, gee, I can take that and have a different platform. I can give you the data. We have to be sensitive. Yeah. We have to be smart in how we present the tools. It's like, here's something that can be done with an airborne, device. Yeah. Drone sensitive, maybe some technology words. But we have to let people know that there's something that they can use. Right? This video's great. I'll just plug it on my YouTube channel playlist.
Oh, cool. Any other reactions, questions?
I think I talked too much, but I agree. It's a great video. It's because that's what I was going to say. It's like shows what's possible. It's like setting a precedent, right, for what's possible. And we don't see drones in a positive way. This is almost like an opportunity to save the drones. I mean, I'm reading a book by Carl Taro Greenfield called Subprime, and it really addresses that issue. It's like a dystopian, he's a friend of mine, so it's like a dystopian future novel. It's crazy, but it really addresses that enlightenment that you got when you were in DC. And I think this is another reason why setting this precedent is so important, right? How we use data, how we respect privacy and the collective humanity, right? Like issue. And the second thing is, do you work with cities in like sanitation districts? Because I would imagine, don't they have some of this data that they could at least guide you with about how to gather it and how to approach it?
Yeah, so thanks, Evelyn, for your questions. And the one general answer is that the policies are still being formed about how best to work with some of these jurisdictions. And so we've worked with everyone from individual cities where we've done flights in connection with this project. So Shelly here is a partner on this, and just before this meeting, Shelly was talking about some surveys that she did this week using drones. So we will go out. We always do things by the book. So we work very closely with cities to get permission to fly. The key thing about the surveys that we do, we, as part of the project, Shelly and Holly is also on the line. She's the funder of this. And then we're working in close partnership with the water board as well, is that the timing of the survey is so very critical. Trash moves around. It's ephemeral. It is there one day and gone the next. It sometimes gets deposited directly by people. And so what we do is we are interested in understanding the fidelity of this survey method to what we're calling reality, which can be measured by virtue of other trash monitoring methods. And so we conduct multiple methods in the same place at the same time. So if the cities were able to furnish, images or videos from the same place, it wouldn't be at the appropriate time to be of use to us to be able to say, our method is this accurate, this precise, this, because we need some measure of truth.
It's more of just a collaborative relationship.
Yeah, so we form those collaborative relationships by virtue of going through a permitting process, which enables us to get permission to fly. Not everyone who flies these vehicles goes through a permitting process. More often than not, people will fly without permission and violate norms, both norms and the law in doing so. We are kind of like almost hamstringing ourselves by following the law, but it's a good thing to do. It's the right thing to do, and it's a good thing to do because we're able to then to spell out exactly what are the appropriate steps to take in different environments. One of the obstacles we face in the Bay Area is that we have so many airports, and airports are a place of no flying. And there's a sphere of influence around the airport, so that you can't fly even 5 miles, up to 5 miles away, and that covers a lot of as the crow flies. So that covers a lot of no-fly zone space. And unfortunately, also the airports are located right at the edge of the bay, which is where we're almost most interested in seeing the trash just before it makes it into the larger receiving waters. So, we've learned about some of the practical restrictions, but there are still many, many opportunities to fly these things in places where you can fly them, which we will be detailing in the trash monitoring playbook that we'll be releasing later next year.
It's getting easier to fly near airports as well.
Yeah.
And now with the parachute it's getting the right waivers to get flowers as well.
Right, and some of the restrictions are actually now being baked into the vehicles.
Yes.
So you can't, it knows where it is, and it will prevent you from flying where you can't fly.
Yeah, I probably can't fly here or near Disney.
Oh, right. There are other times where you can't fly is not governed by a specific place, but it's governed by a time. So, for instance, a place where people try and fly is around sporting events. So sometimes you could fly maybe near an Oakland Coliseum, but when the games are in session, you can't. And they have a whole other industry of drone interceptors. So people who fly drones to intercept other drones and capture them in nets. Believe it or not, no, it sounds like science fiction, but it's true. They fly net, kind of nets out and drones to capture the drones that are violating the law. And they use a combination of either nets or radio interference to crash them. They want them to crash. So
have you ever flown on a 50 miles of the LA River? That would be.
We've done some parts of it as part of our monitoring project, but we have not done the whole thing.
Have you worked with the Army Corps on that?
No.
That could be an interesting study.
It would be very interesting.
Channel, so it wouldn't be too expansive. I mean, it's 50 miles, but still to have that data.
50 miles of flight is actually it requires a special fixed-wing vehicle to capture that. I mean, unless you were going over the course of weeks of flight.
But I don't know how that would. But
yeah, that's actually pretty fun.
Yeah.
But Grant, you guys have used drones? How much of the Santa Ana River or any of those areas have you covered?
We have. I don't know that we've covered the entire stretch of the Santa Ana River. We haven't covered a lot of. We have about 388 miles of flight control channel that operate. We've covered a good chunk of that. All of our imagery is available through an open data site too, so you can actually go in and view the unmanned aerial vehicle footage. There's orthography, there's photospheres, and videos. So they've got all kinds of.
So that could be combined with these AI tools.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
It could, and I would say that our survey group that flies our drones, and I know they've partnered with Squirt in the past. And not on trash, but on some other stuff.
Right, they were doing some. I went out with you guys actually in partnership with Squirt.
Sure.
And you were doing flights to monitor. There was a sloughing of a canyon, radical erosion.
Yeah.
And you wanted to capture that. What was really interesting is that there were two different surveys happening in the same place at the same time by two different vehicles. One was not the county, city of Orange or county? County of Orange. The other one was so one was by the county of Orange, and it was a multi-rotor copter kind of thing, and the other was a fixed-wing vehicle that was flying at like really high up, right? And it was doing its survey while there was this other survey happening, and there was a landowner on the opposite side of the bank where we were flying. Did we meet out there? Were you part of that?
I wasn't there, but I
know about this.
I know the guys who met you.
That's right. Yeah, we were out there, and the landowner emerged from what looked like these ramshackle greenhouses. I think this was prior to weed cultivation being legal, because there were these greenhouses, and we were flying. We weren't surveilling the greenhouses, but they were close to the bank, and incidentally captured as we were flying over the county-owned, county managed land, where the guy emerged holding what looked like a weapon, looked like a gun. This canyon was wide enough that we couldn't see him clearly, and he couldn't see us very clearly. But he was shouting at us to go away, and so that experience did inform. This was prior to this project ever happening with the trash-related stuff, and that informed how the kinds of cautions to take in working with these with these vehicles and the perceptions that you have to manage, because it was scary. Like, I'm not sure his aim would have been good enough to actually capture us or aim at us with his weapon, but it looked like he was maybe aiming for the drone. And he was asking for us to leave. The thing is, the ironic part about it is that he had no awareness that we had much broader imagery captured by the pipeline vehicle, and so that was another thing to learn, is that people think they know what a drone is, which is these multi-rotor things, when there was a fixed-wing vehicle that was flying over and capturing the entire area at the same time. We had no awareness of that at all. So that was a very good learning process. So I'm surprised you knew all about that.
Yeah, I think there are opportunities for partnerships with other public works agencies. I mean, I know there's a lot of, I would say, advancement in terms of public works agencies utilizing, the benefits that can be gained from drones. So there's opportunities out there. For sure.
I think just using the resources that, once you have the data and imagery, because public lab's been using balloons for a long time. It's having resources to then take your imagery and make it data. That's huge, no matter what you're flying.
And so
not flying, just lifting.
the city of West Sacramento is still going forward with the street sweeper.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So that's where. And I don't know how much, Nick, you have any updates on it, but as far as I know, it's moving forward where they've mounted GoPros onto street sweepers, and as the street sweepers are going ahead and capture, they're kind of passively capturing this imagery, which is then fed into another kind of AI model to detect trash. So that's happening as well, and then there are other efforts in the Central Coast to develop these things. So there's things moving in parallel, and it will be interesting to see kind of how it all shakes out. But it's a fascinating moment in time for us.
Yeah, that trash tracker project is moving forward. We have some 100,000 images, and so right now we're creating the training database, which is the real grunt work in any sort of machine learning AI project, is creating a database to teach the machine. We have the machine, a really powerful machine that we finally got, but now we're creating that training database, which requires going through those 100,000 images and eliminating the pictures of just blank asphalt, and then when you do have a piece of trash, trying to classify it based on some sort of structure or categorization structure. So we have several people working on that kind of tedious bit, and then once that's trained up, we can teach the computer and then test it, and then hopefully roll it out and see if people find it interesting to kind of take it and run with it.
Great. So that's the end of the data management subcommittee report. Any questions on this or other topics that we covered in the subcommittee report? Again, Wynn really should have, he regrets that he couldn't be here because he's at another conference, but he's been kind of carrying forward that subcommittee, so thanks go to him. Now it's a treat for us to hear from Shelly Moore, who is going to talk to us about the tally method and her experience in using this method over the years. What's come of this method, the pros and cons, and some of the kinds of expert judgment that she brings to the field. And so Shelly has been doing trash assessments in one way or another for the better part of a decade or longer?
Oh, longer.
Yeah. 2 decades? 3 decades?
Yeah, I don't want to.
4 decades?
I don't want to say.
So she's someone who, it's been a great honor of mine to partner with her over just the past few years. It's been really a great experience for me, and so I really look forward to hearing what she has to say about this particular trash method. So Thank you, Shelly.
All right. Well, you're going to see some things you saw last week too. So
That's great. I'll pretend like I haven't, like it's all new to me.
Awesome. So yeah. Christine and Tony asked me to speak today and talk a little bit about the tally method, and I've been working on the tally method for quite a while, and I'm going to talk about two studies in particular that are in two different habitats that use a tally method. And one of them is quite old, but I think it's really good to show some of the information that you can get out of doing a method like this. We had a question about what types of data should be collected and can be used to answer some questions relative to policy, like the bag bans and whatnot. And I think both of these studies kind of talk to that a little bit. And then at the very end, I'll talk about some of the pros and cons of each method, and I'm sure Tony will have some input as well, as we've both been out in the field recently doing some different methods. So we're all familiar with, trash really has been booming as far as a topic of interest, particularly because in California we've had so much policy and legislation that has recently come up around trash. And I do want to say that each one of these at this point in time only deal with trash that is larger than 5 millimeters. So we're not talking about microplastics at all for any of this. Most recently, we've been talking a lot about what are some of the management questions, and can we formulate monitoring questions that allow us to develop methods to answer the management question. One of the things that has been lacking is baseline information. If you want to say whether or not something's getting better or worse, you've got to have that initial sample to tell you where things are currently at. So a lot of work that we've been doing recently has been towards doing that. And then we want to develop methods that can be used by multiple stakeholders to assess trash and whether or not those conditions are getting better or worse. And how good are those methods? Do they answer just a few questions? Do they answer a lot of questions? And what types of questions do they answer? And everybody has different questions, and everybody uses different monitoring methods for what we've seen. And one of the things that this group is charged with is trying to bring some consistency and standardization to some of those methods as we move forward. So as I said, I'm going to talk about two different studies. And please, as I'm going through the data and the results, think about all of this in relation to what types of management questions could this data be answering. The beach study, the Orange County Beach Debris Study, was an awesome study done back in 1998. SCORP was approached by a group called Divers, which I guess is still around, and it stands for something I can't remember exactly. Divers Involved Voluntarily in Environmental Research or something like that. Was that?
Yeah.
Did I get it?
Yeah.
Yay. And they're still around. And they wanted to do a scientifically rigorous study to look at how much debris was on Orange County beaches. And then the second one is something that's been done by the Southern California Stormwater Monitoring Coalition, and they've been doing it since 2011, and they're doing it again most recently, so we should have some follow-up results in the near future. So the 1998 beach debris study, we had 43 sites that we did. And the sampling design was such that when we were done collecting the data, we could actually extrapolate that data to come up with totals for all of Orange County beaches. The Divers group was led by a guy by the name of Martin Carrion. He was very meticulous. He walked 25-yard segments of the beach from high tide water line all the way to wherever the back of the beach was, whether it was a parking lot or a cliff or whatever it was, whatever that first barrier was, and he counted each and picked up each item that he found. One of the things that we were concerned with is that were we missing something? And so because we wanted to see if perhaps we were missing something, we saved a 5-gallon bucket of sand at each site. And basically, we categorized and counted every item that we found. This is a list of all the top items that were found. You can see the thing that we were surprised by is, yes, we did discover something in the sand that was missing that people don't normally count because they don't normally see it, and that was those pre-production plastic pellets, a lot of people call them nurdles. We estimated over 100 million of those on Orange County beaches alone. Plastics were, really high on the list. Cigarette butts were on the list as well, and this was a big study done to look to see what was most common out there on the beaches. One of the other things we did is where items were identifiable, we identified them, and these were some of the top products that we found under some different categories. No surprise with Marvel being number one. I was surprised at Starburst, mostly because I don't like Starburst, but the other thing was Jack in the Box I didn't expect Jack in the Box to be so high. I actually expected McDonald's, but it turns out if you think about fast food places in Orange County, there are a lot of Jack in the Boxes closer to the water. The beer products, and then drinks as well. So we could also even go farther down in this, and I've got an example of particular cigarette brands that we identified. Some of them are not even in existence today, but you can see that we had quite a list going forward. And it turns out about 30% of the cigarettes are identifiable in the environment. The rest, the markings are gone, and you can't tell what they are. So that was the 1998 study. Let me go back here. And the reason why I wanted to show you that is to show you not just that we categorized items, but we went brand level and even farther down. And I'm showing you this because I have an interest in repeating this study, and I'm looking for some volunteers to help me with that, because I think it would be a great follow-up study 20 some odd years later to see whether or not those numbers are indeed getting better or worse, because this study speaks to all beaches in Orange County. So if anybody's interested,
If Martin will do it also.
If Martin will do it, he'll do it. Okay. Martin's still around because I've seen he still does newsletters. So yeah.
He's awesome.
Yeah. Back in 2013, the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition for Southern California was doing some a regional stream survey, and as part of that survey, they were looking at some different things, all aspects of stream health, from looking at the bugs that they were finding in the water, algae, the hydrology, all different kinds of things they were looking at, and they were going to be going out and doing these hundreds of sites, and they were willing to do trash assessments as well. So at each site, they did 100-foot or 30-meter swath of river in what's called bankful width. Basically, I think it's a 2-year flood mark. And in the Cement Channel, this is the LA River near Willow in Long Beach. Basically, it's from side to side. And we send teams out to count every item and place them into larger categories such as plastic, metal, glass, and then within each one of those categories we have finer distinctions. For example, with plastic we have small hard plastic pieces, foamed plastic pieces, we have items such as cups, lids, and those kinds of things. There's quite a few items in each category. This was a very comprehensive survey, and basically went from Ventura County all the way down to San Diego County and inland to Riverside and then San Bernardino, I believe. Some of the general results that we got out of the study is if you walk in some urban river, 100-foot swath, you have a 100% chance of finding at least one piece of trash, if not more. So you've got a pretty good shot if you're looking for trash. Plastic, of course, was our number one item, and trash is definitely abundant closer to roads, and I'll show you a graph that shows that in a little bit. Yep.
Quick question. So, did you do any surveys in, let's say, the San Gabriel Mountains or any nearby areas where you didn't find trash? You know, because it's 100%.
Yeah. So there were
urban rivers. Where is it the same in non-urban rivers?
Yeah. So there's three categories of land use. It was urban, ag, and open. And the percentages were lower for ag and open. I believe, I want to say they were around 80% for ag and maybe 60% for open, but I can look that up.
60% of the sites would have
trash.
At least some trash.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. This is our top 10 items, and what you can see are the top 10 items make up about 75% of all trash that was found in rivers and streams. Plastic by far is the number one item. For some reason, and I always point this out, sports balls make their way into streams and rivers. You get all kinds of different ones. I've actually seen golf balls go bouncing by in the water because there's actually, for example, on San Gabriel River, there's some golf courses that back up to it. So yeah, those are the things that we're finding the most.
Is it percentage in number or weight?
Number.
The pieces.
Yeah.
It's tricky
so
because with styrofoam, you know what I mean, it breaks down.
Yes.
So that could actually be one cup.
It could.
But it's all just in pieces.
Yeah, and so I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the pros and cons of the method. Yeah. So again, I said debris was in everywhere in urban areas. This is actually broken out by county, and you can see that with the exception of LA and San Diego, everything's at 100%, but they're pretty high up there as well. So this is the size of a given road. We looked at sites and the distance to the nearest road, and typically when we had sites closer to roads, they had higher amounts of trash, particularly if they were a larger type of road. So to get to your question about the plastic bag ban, what we did was we didn't go into the study with that question, but after the study was completed, we thought, why don't we take a look to see whether or not those bag bans were being effective. And it was at a time where there were still bans at the city and maybe county. LA County had a bag ban, but mostly at the city or smaller jurisdiction level. It wasn't a statewide bag ban. And what we found was that there was about a 3-to-1 ratio of bags in areas without bans to areas with bans. So there does look like to be some effectiveness. One of the things that we will look to do with the more recent survey data that we're going to get is to look at these numbers more and see if they've been going down in all areas, because now we have a statewide ban on plastic bags. I also broke the data out, for instance, on styrofoam or what are they're called, polystyrene now, and there were no differences in areas that had bans versus areas that didn't have bans. So we didn't see anything there. But because of the type of data that we have, we can certainly look at certain items and get a little bit more detailed information on those items and look at where they're located.
Shelly, do you think you would have to take into account any sort of like aging factors? So in other words, something may be in the environment for some time and finally make its way into the survey site. So if you're looking at the effectiveness of the bag ban that was put into place a couple of years ago, there maybe the plastic bag you're seeing is 3-4 years old. Is that possible? And is there a way to account for that in some way so that you're able to determine whether the bag was deposited into the environment before
before or after the ban?
Yeah, in my opinion, there's no good way of doing that. There was a site in the LA River where it was in the middle of summer, and there were a lot of plastic bags, and you could tell they had been photodegraded. They were brittle, they were falling apart, but they hadn't been there for years, because the LA River flows pretty good during the storm. The San Gabriel River, the site that we often talk about, we were there yesterday, and because we had storms last week, there were a lot of bags there. They weren't photodegraded, but they were broken apart. They were in pieces from the turbulence of the storm itself. So I think being able to age them wouldn't be an easy thing to do. I think it would be very subjective. If we could come up with a test method for doing that, that would be awesome.
Shelly, what do you have? I don't remember if it was 513 or 18, where there was, or maybe it was just talked about, but clearing an area, kind of a temporal study where you're looking at where the trash is and instead of picking it up and then going back to that same area and looking at it again, and then you would see if it was a newly deposited bag, you would know.
Right. So with the new survey in 2018-2019, they do have some revisit sites. So there'll be like a 5-year difference in those. And I can tell you, the site that we went to yesterday, we did just a few months ago, and we removed all of the items. It made no difference whatsoever.
Right, but then the trash that you do find, can you rule out that it's legacy bags from prior to the ban?
I don't think we can. The only thing that would allow us to do that would be if we could identify the bag, and it was something relatively old. But as far as being able to age them, I don't think so. It depends on where the bag ends up. If it's in an aquatic environment and it stays in the water for a while, it's going to degrade a lot slower than if it's out in the sun. So there's just a lot of iffiness about it.
So if an area is cleared and then new trash appears, it could be trash that's from some other area that maybe there was a big storm and it really kind of pushed it through finally. Yeah, maybe pre-ban trash.
Yeah. There's bags that get in the sediment or a tree, get a big storm coming through, and it just stirs up everything. So they both become available.
We joke about bag archaeology all the time because we see stuff that's 6 feet deep and then they go to clear something and all of a sudden it's all unearthed and comes back and forth. Oh, I did trawl trash archaeology. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. We had a site come from. We had a site, there was some clear erosion going on, and we found a chip bag that was like Frito-Lay 80s era type bag that had been buried in the sediment. So, and it had come up to the surface at that point. So,
this is part of working with sanitation, because there's areas that they address, and then there are areas that they don't address, right? I mean, just knowing maps of where they pick up trash, where they don't pick up trash, or if they're picked up because there's an emergency or somebody calls, that's one thing. But for their regular routes, it might be interesting to correlate just that.
Yeah, we can certainly look at street sweeping. This particular survey is happening in rivers and streams. And the public works agencies do a lot of work to make sure that they're kept clean.
But how often? Like once a year? Isn't it all public information or no? Maybe, I don't know.
To a certain extent it is. It's
complicated.
I would say it doesn't always daylight, to the extent where you can use it, especially for something like this. But there is, I think you're on something there, because there's a lot of data there. It's just how do you daylight it, and how do we put it to use?
It's almost like an urban planning issue.
Right.
Public, like an urban.
Sounds like a data need.
An urban planning graduate.
Monitoring information.
frequency and
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to know where your trash hotspots are, you go and talk to your public works inspectors, and they're all assigned to different areas. Those, I mean, they know.
Yeah.
Those are the people who know they know the hotspots.
There's also places, I mean, say there's all kinds of places where code compliance has no idea where the trash is.
Right.
For who? Like code compliance, whoever it is that's doing the compliance, because there's so much private property that all that is, there's trash that's been there for 20 years that's the property owner just is pretending that they don't know about,
Wash it away, right? Storms can change.
They could, yeah.
So that's the 2011 through 2013 study. Those were when those sites were assessed. So we consider this to be somewhat of a baseline for Southern California, particularly the rivers and streams. What's coming up now is they've redone a few of those sites. We've also got some new sites that they've been working on. And we have revisited the methods themselves to see if there's anything we can do. One of the complaints about this method, and I'll talk a little bit more about it when I get to the con slide, is that these are very labor-intensive methods. Counting each item takes a long time. And so the SMC said they would do the survey again, but they were looking for ways of making it so that they weren't as time-consuming. So one of the things we did was high-count items like the small hard plastic pieces, where you could have hundreds of pieces of little pieces of plastic in a site. We allowed them to bin those, so we had categories of small, moderate, or low, moderate, and high. And then we also did revisit the list to see if maybe we needed to make changes in some of the items. I know in some of the historical trawl stuff, they used to find the pull tops on the cans, and they don't find those anymore. So they find different things now, like single-use containers and those kinds of things. So changes are being made to some of the lists that have been around for a while. One of the things that Tony and I have been working on is a project with the tobacco control folks. And so we wanted to add tobacco wrappers because those are becoming a big deal now. So we are revisiting that. Another study that Tony has alluded to many times is that we're doing a method evaluation study where we're actually taking the tally method and comparing it to a volume method, a visual method, the drone imagery, and we've got one other method that we've started including, which is a method developed by the EPA. I wanted to show you some of those results today, but since they're not published, I didn't want to put them up there, but I will talk a little bit about why we have some pros and cons with the tally method versus some of those other methods that we've been testing.
What's the EPA method?
The EPA method is the Escaped Trash Assessment Protocol, or ETAP method. It's similar to this tally method, but they also do some other assessments with it. For instance, they do try to age the items, and they also look at hazard assessment. If it's sharp, what is it? What's that?
Smothering.
Smothering. Whether or not it might have.
Habitat.
What's that?
Test habitat.
Test habitat. They've got some other things that they're looking at, and we're gonna. And they have a slightly different list than we have for the tally as well. So we're gonna do some comparisons.
Have you ever thought about doing it by weight?
They do it by weight.
Yes.
Yeah, because that would
US EPA does it.
That would streamline. I mean, in terms of time consuming, that would be a big time saver. But you lose a lot of the resolution.
That's the problem with it. So with the tally method, the pros are you can do those bag comparisons because you actually have numbers of bags. You can answer a lot of those policy questions. The thing that's really coming up, in the beginning I pointed out that a lot of the legislation right now is only for things greater than 5 millimeters, but we're finding so much of the smaller stuff. I think that's going to come up in the long run. The other thing is that there's always new items that are out there of concern. One of the things that we came across, because we've been working with the tobacco folks, is that many times we've classified things we found in the environment as e-waste, not realizing that they were the electronic cigarettes. So we've got a whole spiel that we do when we're training people about how to recognize the e-waste.
The tobacco waste.
Tobacco waste, yes. There's other things that are starting to come up. We've the folks that have been doing some of the surveys on the roads have started identifying dental picks as being an item that we're finding a lot of.
Everywhere.
Yeah. So being able to do the tally method really helps as far as identifying some of those other things that are becoming a concern.
You break it out in terms of straws, because they just recently banned straws too.
We do have straws as a category. It's actually combined with stirs, the Starbucks things that they use.
You know, if you pour your cream in first, you don't need to stir.
I do that. So yeah. So the tally method really is. There's a lot of information, detailed information that you can get out of it. But I will say that I took that picture yesterday in the San Gabriel River, and you know, the first thing that happens with the crew when we go down and see a site like that is you hear this collective groan, because we're going to be there for a while. So one of the things that is a con is that it's very labor intensive. You've got to do a lot more training, because you want to make sure there's consistency in what everybody's calling each item. You know, one time I was out in the field and a young person found an item and wanted to call it a small hard plastic piece, and I recognized it as a cigar tip. And but she had never been exposed to cigar tips. So there's a lot of training that needs to go in to make sure that everybody's being consistent. And I think it's great what the data group is doing with creating, you know, the catalogs and the definitions and all that stuff. Make sure everybody's calling the same thing, the same thing.
So the stuff that Wynn's working on, that's going to have visual?
It doesn't, I don't know if he has images, but you know, it's so numerous.
Yeah, I know, but yeah, that's going to be a common issue then.
Yeah. And how to recognize.
Yeah, because who's going to read all that first to begin with?
I would say that's a good point of feedback.
Pictures, and then we're teaching the drones and everything, those are pictures.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good point.
And what about also with bottled water? Like from your 98 study, bottled water was less of a product, you know, than it is now. I mean, the curve is spiking upwards, not downwards. So is there a way to correlate that sales relate to trash? Charles Moore has proved that in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
With consumption, he created that correlation. Can you do that with land trash? You know what I mean? Is there like a way to...
We should be able to do that.
That would be really helpful for future legislation.
That is one of our categories under plastic is plastic bottles. So we should be able to do something like that. One of the other cons to the tally method is the fact that the Southern California folks do a method completely different from the Northern California folks. They're more interested in how much space is the trash taking up, less concerned with what the items are. This particular site, this picture had 500 items, and was one of our highest sites as far as number of trash items. They were mostly cigarettes, and volume-wise, this wouldn't even hardly be a blip. And we're finding in the method comparison study that we've been working on that there is not a real good relationship between volume and the tally method, because you can have a lot of items that don't take up a lot of space, and vice versa, items that take up space, but there's not a lot of them. And
well, can't you do it the same thing twice? I mean, isn't it a way to...
You mean do both methods?
Yeah.
That people don't want to do both methods. They want to do one or the other. And they're time consuming.
Yeah, no,
So we used to do both with straw trash, and actually with the bike 13, right? We tried to coordinate between the riverine study and the trawl debris that is found, and to try to see if we could link it up somehow. And we also use the tally method, but we also would weigh everything, and the problem is it's covered in sediment, so it's wet, it's fouled with organisms, and it took a lot of time. And so we got rid of the weight.
So can't you make, like, if you see a water bottle, you know it weighs this much, so you can also do a weight measurement without having to measure
if you know how much it weighs, you can do that.
You know what I mean? Just by
knowing. Your computer later on, 5 years later.
So there's been some talk, and there is some conversation going on as far as kind of normalizing some of that stuff. There are groups that are weighing things and to get a better idea of what they weigh dry, so that we can come up with better estimates. One of the things with the ETAP method for determining whether or not what type of hazard something is, you should, based on the item, you should be able to give some good idea of what type of hazard it is. If you find a broken piece of glass, it's going to be a sharp. And counting that in the field is very time consuming, marking a tally mark for each one of those glass pieces that's sharp. Why not just mark it as a glass piece, go back to to your computer, and that all of those automatically get listed as being sharp.
And stepping up with weight too.
Yes. So there's a lot of work that some different groups are doing to try to remedy.
That's a good math.
Puzzle. That's a really good point, that you can convert a tally to a weight. You can about calculate with probably some amount of accuracy, but you can't do it the other way around.
Right. So there's a lot of pros and cons to the tally method. The other one you brought up was things break apart in the field. How do you count those? Our general rule of thumb is if something looks like it came from the same item, we count it as one. But if it looks like it came from different types of items, we count them separately. I mean, some people will say this method is an underestimate of what's out there, because we have actually, as part of the method comparison study, what we've done is we've sent a crew through to the site, and then we had another crew follow to see how much they missed. And they kept following until there was a zero count. Typically most of the items were found within 2 to 3 passes, but there was a couple sites that took 5 passes to get every single item. So we're doing a lot of different things with the method comparisons so that we can look at and create that playbook that will inform people based on their monitoring questions, the management questions, and their resources will inform them on what types of methods they may be able to use.
Are bottle tops listed separately, or are they part of a bottle?
Bottle type.
The lids.
The lids are listed
as a separate item or part of a bottle item?
No, separate.
Separate.
Yeah.
Because that data could come in handy for leash lid loss. That would be, right? That's really important.
We're running low on time, but.
Okay.
But no,
I'm pretty much done. And I think the next is questions. And unless you have anything to input, because you've been out in the field working on this stuff as well.
No, I think you covered it. Yeah.
Okay. These don't go into encampment-related trash areas, right? So waterways.
The interesting thing, that one slide or picture that I showed of the 500 items, where it doesn't look like there's hardly anything.
Right.
It's mostly vegetation. There's a homeless encampment right near there, and that's why there were 300 cigarettes.
Right.
Because we saw those people standing at the top just passing their cigarettes. So if there is a chance that we're going to encounter a homeless person within our site, or nearby, we skip it. This particular site we wanted to do because there was a lot of that smaller stuff.
Right.
And we were aware of them, and they were aware of us, and they kept their distance and let us finish the site without any complications.
I'm mostly just asking, we did a really limited study of one of the tributaries of the river, and we did a tally count for items not related to encampments, and then we did a just mass count for the encampment related, and then we also weighed the tally stuff. and the tallied stuff was 0.7% of the total mass of the trash in that area, because all of the rest of it was associated with the encampment. So it was sort of like, it's interesting to see the tally count, but it's such a tiny, at least in that super limited, understandably, case, it's such a tiny percentage of the amount of trash that was in that waterway.
How did you do the attribution?
Yeah. So we use the sort of same studies that we do for the rest of the river park. So most of it is active, so it's easy to tell there's somebody actively living there. And if it was part of what we determined to either be like the spot where they're living or the area that's immediately surrounding where it appears that they're interacting with that debris, either as like it's the dump for the encampment or sort of stuff that escaped from the encampment. But at that time we were using 100-meter sections. We'd collect all the trash, sort it, and then the encampment related stuff was handled separately. Active encampment related.
Right. Okay.
So the other stuff that was in the stream.
So it's not about classifying the trash itself, it's about understanding the spatial relationship.
Correct.
Okay.
So at that time it was like the stuff that was actively part of the encampment versus stuff that was away from the encampment, which may have come from those encampments, certainly, like you said, with the cigarette butts, but was far enough away that it did not appear to be part of like the camp area.
How many people, since there's an encampment, and how many people is just like family or one? You know, what's the difference? How do you define encampment?
Oh, like people, how many people are living in the encampment?
Like, yeah, what, like.
I mean, it varies. We use a 1.5 multiplier for, like, if we've called it an encampment site that is 1.5 people. Most of it just depends on them. There's also camp complexes where there might be 30 people.
Right.
In that particular creek, we had more camp complexes like that where there's 10 or 20 different people.
So the encampment can just be 1.5 people?
On average in our watershed, that's our multiplier.
Right. So thank you so much, Shelly, for your presentation.
Can I just take your photograph? Would you be able to share the results of the comparison study with the group when you get that?
Absolutely.
So,
We'll be putting it up on trashmonitoring.org.
Okay.
And it will be available probably through the OPC as well and State Water Board.
Cool. Thank you.
I had a question about your band bag graphic. Being involved in the Tijuana Valley WQIP, I know that watershed is in terrible shape. And I noticed you had one little blip, I think it was down the TJ River. I'm not sure, it could have been the New River, but do you monitor what's coming into the estuary, or is international stuff kind of out of the scope?
No, we don't do much work down there. We've been working with some of the folks out of the estuary group down there, and trying to get some funding to do some trash work, because there's a ton of trash that comes. Yeah, there's a ton. We actually put in a proposal for doing some drone work in that area that didn't get funded.
It did get funded in the end.
Did it?
Yes, under a separate group.
And there's a separate group, okay.
We've had a couple conversations with them.
Good.
Because they're interested in learning from
our project.
Yeah.
Good. So it looks like we do have something going on, but yeah, we haven't done a lot down there. And there's certainly a lot of work that can be done.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. We can probably just dig into Shelly's work for some time, but in the interest of keeping everything on schedule, we'd like to push on, and there's a lot of wrap-up stuff we want to cover before we close the meeting.
Yeah, and I think it should just take a couple minutes. Kind of the next steps for the group, kind of identifying the next topic of interest or other topics of interest. We already pointed out maybe discussing how we compare to what other states are doing as a meeting topic. If anybody else has other ideas of what they'd like a theme for one of our next work group meetings to be, you can let us know now or send Tony and I a message. We're planning to stick with the quarterly schedule, which would put us having another meeting in March or April. That would be in Northern California again, but of course with the webinar option. Some of the other things I noted that we'll be developing a subgroup. We already have a couple people who have sort of volunteered or been appointed to the charter subgroup. So hopefully for the next meeting we can have that buttoned up.
Could you
send an email just to both of us, just so we can connect.
Definitely. We are going to figure out the best way to share subcommittee information so that everyone can access information and schedule for the subcommittee, or if you could like to join in at some time. We are working on updating the website still. Nick had us coordinating with an intern over the summer to get the website up for our group, but then she finished her internship and we didn't finish the website in time, so we have to connect with Nick on getting that wrapped up, and we can fold the subcommittee follow-up stuff into that. We will also reach out to Nick to facilitate conversation with outreach coordinators to see if we can fill some of the gaps on the work groups that we identified and get more information on the website once that's done. And then...
Should we bring up the upcoming events?
Oh, yes, upcoming events. Oh, before I get to upcoming events, Nick has created a Google Calendar for all of the council activities. So I have just a little example here of today. If you subscribe to the Google Calendar, and we've created a link for you to follow to do so, you can see when all the council activities are. So Safe to Swim Network meeting was this morning. Our group shows up on this calendar. So it's a good way to see what all the work groups are doing or when they're all meeting, if you're interested in joining in some of their meetings. And then finally, we're just putting in a plug for some upcoming events. The Trash Datathon is in February, following up on the past meeting that we had last month. That's to sort of develop some of the information a little bit more to make it hackable. And then in June, there will be a hackathon along with the Water Data Science Symposium. So that one's a little further out, but we just kind of wanted to make everyone aware of that there's a lot going on in the trash realm. And we'll continue to update everybody through our listserv when these activities are happening, registration information, all that. And in the future, we will be sending out a save the date as an Outlook calendar reminder. We've gotten some feedback that would be really helpful if we start plugging things into your calendar. So we'll see how that goes for the next meeting, or if people don't want their calendar being populated.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming. I'm glad that this meeting was so well attended in person and online. Any closing thoughts, questions?
Thanks to Michael Baker for hosting us.
Yes, thanks again. Thanks for coordinating everything.
I'll pass it along to our admin who prepped all the snacks for us.
It was great. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much. Well, everyone travel safely, and we will be in touch.